Hello and welcome back to the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. We have a very special episode today. We have a repeat guest slash commentator in Mr. Brett Ender. Over the past couple weeks, I was asked some questions from some different people in the audience around my Instagram posts and stories. And I wanted to start putting together a little bit of side content outside of our normal content in order to answer those questions. Last week, the big thing I had shared on my Instagram story about my fear of flying. I had talked to everyone that I went through this experience at Austin Airport. I was there for 3 days and eventually got out of there on the third day and got to my destination. But a lot of questions around fear of flying and how that shows up for me or why that shows up for me. And I started thinking about it, especially when I was on the airplane. And in my head, I'm like, okay, I can't be the only one. It can't be just me. There has to be other people that are suffering from this or struggling with this, and I'm looking for, an opportunity or an outlet in order to help those people. One, but two, I think the big thing or the biggest part of this for me is making it okay in the airport to ask for help, right? And I don't know what that looks like or how we show up for that. If it's like a group or like an app that says like, hey, this is where the people are that are scared of flying or meeting and hanging out right now. Because I know for me, I'm on Google looking up ways to deal with fear of flying from the time I get to the airport until the time I get off the plane. And hopefully it doesn't show up like that for everyone, but it certainly does for me. I thought it would be an interesting conversation though, because I know for you, it doesn't even register. And so I think that it's interesting for someone that has that fear to talk to someone that it doesn't even register with to see if some balance can be found there too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I'm excited for this topic, man. And, from the time that you and I met and became brothers, from the first episode of ADY that we did together, your philosophy's always just been put it on a billboard because you're very vulnerable with everything, which I love because people can listen to this episode or shake your hand and they know the real you. And I didn't know that about you until you posted that on your Instagram story. And I was like, okay, this motherfucker's a little bit human because I'm like, you seem so fearless in everything. But the thing that I love about this topic is that we all have these irrational fears. And what we do is we just kind of lock them into this little box in the corner of our closet. And we just push it off and push it off and push it off. And I feel like over time, it just grows to be this bigger monster because you're not confronting that thing head on. So I'm excited to dig into this. And I'm just curious, where do you think, has that fear of flying always been there since the time that you were a little kid, or is it something that's manifested over time?
A little bit of both. It's a great question. A little bit of both. My first flight ever was to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I think I was 5 years old. I flew with my mom. We went and visited some family friends. I don't remember being afraid then. The next flight that I remember was 8 or 9 years old. We flew to Georgia. I might have been 10. We flew to Georgia though, and on the way back, I didn't want to get on the plane for whatever reason. And I remember being terrified and basically getting drug on the plane. As a kid, you were there with your mom and your stepdad, so I was definitely 10. But you're there with your mom and your stepdad, and they're like actively dragging you on the plane against your will because you need to get home. And, they held my hand the whole way, but I was terrified. I don't know what it was or kind of how it crept up like that. And then I would fly a good bit from 10 years old to 18 years old. We would go on different trips and go see different things. And I went to Mexico, Dallas one time. I mean, all these different places. But every time there was a little bit of nerves. And I think that the biggest shift took place in college. So, and I shared this a little bit on the first podcast we did. But in college, we had charter flights. So all the away games, if they were more than like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, we were on a plane. And it was just us on the plane. And my senior year, this whole time I would be nervous, right? I'd get on the flight, I'd be nervous, but we would get where we're going and, that would be that. Well, my senior year, we got on a flight and I'll never forget it. We were taking off, and essentially, I have teammates that can vouch for this too, but essentially, I remember all the lights flickering in the plane while we're taking off and hitting it felt like an air void is the best way I can explain it. But it, like the wings lost lift and the plane just dropped. Like not 10 feet, not 20 feet. Like it dropped. Like there was shit floating in the air, right? And people screaming, like grown men, you know what I mean? Big boys. And I remember when that happened, we still had the rest of the flight to go. So I was freaking out the rest of the flight. That would show up again probably 6 weeks after that. We didn't fly anymore. And then going to the bowl game, I was really hungover, and I had an anxiety attack on the tarmac in Ohio before the plane took off. And I think that showed up in a couple different ways, but one, it was a different airline. We always flew JetBlue.
It's a great airline.
Yeah. We show up, and it's like southwestern, eastern United States airline of the year, like across the plane. Like I don't even know what kind of plane it was. So that was the start of it. And then I got on the plane and I had teammates make some comments like, you know, we haven't been to a bowl game in 40 years. You know, we're the next We Are Marshall type thing. I had a freak out. I had to get off the plane and drove to the bowl game. So I didn't fly again until it was probably 3 years after that. And I flew to Tampa for a job interview. And getting down there, I strategically set up my flight. So the first one was a 17-minute flight from Greensboro, North Carolina to Charlotte, North Carolina, just to make sure I could do it. I was like, I can do anything for 17 minutes.
Little test run.
Yeah.
Love it.
And I had to be sober because I was going to an interview that day. So I did that, got on the flight in Charlotte, made it to Tampa, really proud of myself. Did the interview. That was successful. Got the offer. Got back to the airport. And I remember sitting at the airport. There's a Chili's in TPA at Tampa. And I remember sitting there and texting my mom. And I sent her like a picture. And it was like, I had a beer and a shot. And I was like, oh yeah, this flight's going to be no problem. I'll be good now. And I looked up at the monitor. And in Tampa, if you've ever been there at the airport, everything's glass, like any airport, but you can see for miles. And it looked like a hurricane was making landfall, right? Like I swear, it was this massive black cloud. It showed up on the radar as this horrible storm. So I freaked out. This is 2 days before Christmas. I freaked out and rented a car and drove from Tampa back to Virginia. So I was like, okay, win-win. Like I did 2 flights, but not the rest of them. From that point, so I'd have been 24. For the next 6 years, I didn't fly sober one time. If I had to be sober, I would leave the airport. I wouldn't get on the plane. Wouldn't even board. I would have to leave the airport and drive wherever I was going. If I was hammered, I'd get on a plane to Mars.
Wow.
Right?
No problem.
Zero problem. I'd be on there dancing, having a good time, talking to people. But in that time frame, I developed, I don't know, we've never actually talked about this. I'm a big like rituals person, especially if it's something around fear, on how I approach it, or nerves. So for flying, for me, that entire time that I was flying for business but drinking, I'd listen to, there's a song by Chris Brown called New Flame. I'd listen to that on takeoff every single time. And I would always say the same thing, like look out the window and be like, God, it's in your hands. If you want me to live, here we are. But like at that point, it's too late. The door's shut, right? So if you're going to go down, like it's over. So that was kind of my ritual. And I would drink, like at the airport, most airport bars open at 7. So my thing at that time, especially pre-flight, was Bud Light and Fireball. Shot of Fireball, Bud Light, 3 or 4 of them. Get on the plane, double Jack and Cokes. And then usually I get where I was going and be so hammered, by the time I landed, I wasn't really worth a damn the rest of the day. But either way, I did that for years. And then in 2020, when I got sober, the program that I was working, so I got sober in Atlanta, but the program I was working was in Austin. And I was like, holy crap, like I got to fly back to go meet with this person who's helping me work my inventory. And I got to do it sober. Oh man. And that was a big test for me in sobriety. It was like, okay, if I can do this, there's nothing that's ever going to get me to drink again. Like if I can get on this airplane sober, just to go work this program, clearly that's the most important thing.
Were you tempted at all to take a shot before and just be like, I'm just going to take the edge off, man. It's fine.
Not even a little bit. I literally was, but I've told you this. At that point, it was like I'll die any other way first.
Yeah.
It won't be that.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, for me, it's very black and white in that way. And when things are black and white for me, it's super helpful. But that was the black and white for me in that scenario. So flew back and forth a few times from Austin to Atlanta. And then I've flown probably, I don't know, 20, 25 flights since I got sober. But I've bailed on a few of them until recently. I'm at 8 flights in a row, right? That sounds so silly to someone who's probably listening, but like I've made 8 flights in a row. And most recently, when I flew out of Austin, I had every opportunity to walk out of that airport for 3 days. And I was like, nope, I'm going to face it. Nope, I'm going to face it. It is what it is. I'm going to sit through this. I'm going to figure it out. But each time it builds a level of confidence. It doesn't make it easier. I'm still terrified shitless. Like get to the airport, get through security, sitting at the gate, and everyone looks so cool and calm. Like there's just another day. And I know all the facts. I know that it's the safest means of travel. I know you're more likely to get struck by lightning. I know all these things. I know there hasn't been a large domestic commercial plane crash in years and years and years. I know that Delta's one of the safest airlines. I know all this. I know planes are designed for turbulence, but it's the one fear in my life that logic doesn't overrule. Right? That it doesn't matter how many facts I learn, it doesn't replace that fear. And I started thinking about that. I was like, man, I can't be the only one. They have websites for this shit. You know what I mean? So clearly other people struggle with it.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how it developed over time. But my thoughts when I fly are much deeper than just like that drop that I experienced. It's like you saw the door get ripped off that Alaska Airlines flight, the 737 MAX.
Yes.
Right. I think about shit like that. Like if that door gets ripped off, like that sucks. Like that's a horrible way to die. Like that's going to be a long day. Or like, you know, if I get up to go to the bathroom and turbulence hits and I break my neck, you know, whatever it is, like I have all these different thoughts. Like someone's going to try to hijack the plane and I'm going to have to kill them with my plastic utensil that the airline gave me. Like, but these are the things that go through my head from the time we sit down on the plane till the time we land.
Got it.
And so I have to find ways to kind of manage those things. And maybe it's just me that's that crazy that thinks about shit like that. And that's fine if it is. I don't really care. But maybe there's people out there that do think about shit like this and they're like, well, at least somebody else is going through it.
So to answer your question, fear is so interesting, right? Because when I look at you, I've always just interpreted you as the guy that you just don't really fear anything. Like you think about, you will go on runs in Austin at 12 o'clock at night when statistically there's something way worse to happen to you on a run versus you flying Delta or JetBlue, these massive multi-billion-dollar companies who have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to make the experience as safe as possible. And that's, I don't know why, because I'm irrational about a lot of things, but for flying in particular, I think also because I just flew a lot with my parents when I was younger, I think that rationality always overcame the fear a little bit. So like when we would hit turbulence or we would take off, I think I would feel a little bit of that, but then my brain is always just flashed to like, okay, the statistical probability of this plane going down is super low. The plane crashes that you see are typically private planes and things like that. I would always focus on the rationalization of that, but I do have irrational fears in other areas. And I've talked to a lot of people, old and young. It's typically older people actually, which makes sense because I think plane crashes were more common 50 years ago. But my point in saying this is that I think the vulnerability that you have is a really good thing. And I think this podcast is going to be relatable to either if you have a fear of flying or this like irrational fear that you've put off for a long time, because there's 1,000% a world where we can confront this and then you're sitting back 2 years later and something that was a weakness is now a strength, and you're going to have that added confidence of being like, dude, I know what it feels like to have to get shit-faced before a flight, and now I can just go where I need to go and I don't feel that resistance anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for me it's become more and more important. I want to travel. I want to experience things.
You want to see the world.
Yeah, and you can't do that without getting on an airplane.
Yeah.
Unless you want to take a fucking boat, you know, for 7 days to get to Europe or whatever it is. I'm not really interested in that. So it's something that I have to face. And then as business grows and those opportunities start happening, like I'm going to have to get on an airplane, or I don't want that bad enough, right? And so for me, it's about, I have to remind myself of all that every single time. But now my ritual, so I'm pretty proud of myself. The last 8 flights, no music. I took the music away.
How come?
Same reason I take it away when I run. If I'm struggling, I don't listen to music when I run, because if there's something I need to face, and music honestly gives me a way to avoid it. And so for flying, I applied that. I'm like, okay, I'm jamming out. Music gives me peace. Music gives me, serenity and calmness, all these things. Maybe there's part of flying I just need to face. And so the last 8 flights, no music. And I'm proud of that. But it's little things like that, I think, for people that are overcoming a fear that it takes. I think I've never considered myself OCD in most areas, but I'm OCD around catching a flight. Like I have to show up at a certain time. I have to pack a certain way. I have to sit at a certain gate facing a certain way. I go on, like I look up turbulence forecasts. Like you can look up the same ones the pilots get days in advance to understand where the turbulence is going to be in the United States and what I think the flight plan is going to be. And then what kind of flight I'm on, like as far as airplanes. Like I know out of Austin to Atlanta, it's always an A321, which is an Airbus. I know that from Atlanta to Roanoke, it's always a Canadair, unless they have a big flight going in. Sometimes they'll do an A319 or A320. This sounds foreign to people that aren't afraid of flying. They don't know what kind of fucking airplane they're on. But the 737 is all Southwest flies, right? I loved flying Southwest when I was hammered because they always sent me free drink tickets. But I go into that level of depth or detail. I look at the pilots when they come to get on the plane, right? I'm like, does this guy look solid? Does this lady look solid? It never ends though, right? It's like, and if I don't see the pilots, I'm wondering like, I wonder what I wonder how they carry themselves. Are they confident, right? Are they former military? That always makes me feel better when I find out that they're retired like 20 years from flying, C-130s or, C-5 Galaxies or whatever. I'm like, oh, okay. They have no problem with this bird. But it's that level of OCD where I need to know everything about the flight, and I'm still uncomfortable with it.
How early are you getting to the airport?
So big shift for me in this new transition, and it's tied to that count, and we'll talk about the count on a different side episode. Usually, so rule used to be, I don't even know if it still applies, you couldn't check a bag if it was outside of 3 hours of your boarding time or your flight time. So I was showing up at 3 hours every single time, pre-flight. Get there. The other reason is I always have to take a massive dump when I get to the airport because of nerves.
Little nervous shit.
Yeah. Like I have to do it. So I need time for that. I need time. I like to go and like see if there's some snacks I want. I always drink water, try to get like overly hydrated, which becomes a problem but then it forces me to get up on the plane to piss, which is good. But I kind of just like walk around and look and see what flights are delayed, what flights are canceled. Oh, is there a region of the United States that's impacted right now? I'll track my flight coming in on the flight radar, like on the phone. So like I'll know if my plane's coming in from my eventual destination or if it's a transcontinental flight from somewhere else. Like sometimes you'll get Boston to Austin, Austin to Atlanta. So I know where the pilots have been. And then I wonder like when they switch out, like, oh man, I wonder if they're fatigued. So I show up super early. But 4 flights ago, my parents do TSA pre-check. They do all the fingerprinting and all that. And my mom's like, you ought to get pre-check. And I've avoided it for years, right? I'm like, I don't like doing all that. Like, I feel like they're not really checking people. It doesn't feel secure. And she's like, it'll help you with your anxiety, though, because you're not going to be waiting in line with people as long. And she's like, that probably contributes a little bit to it. So I'm stubborn. I'm hard-headed. We were just talking about this. I didn't listen for years. I finally did it. Got pre-check. So this past time I flew, I got to the airport 30 minutes before boarding and went through TSA at Austin, literally walked from there to like 8 Deltas down on that end and got right on the plane. right, on the third day, which was great for me because like there was no time to be anxious, right? I did have time to take a dump, but like outside of that, there was no time. And so flying back, same thing. I got there right before. So I think that that's kind of shifted for me now as to where getting there too early probably isn't a great thing for me either because it just stirs me up.
Yeah, when I growing up, and my mom is still like this. She's like, she wants to be checked in at least 2 hours before the flight is taking off. And like back in the 90s, Clear didn't exist. TSA wasn't as big of a thing. But you imagine that anxiety building around that because if you don't have TSA or you don't have Clear, you don't know how long the line is going to be, especially something like Austin, an overpopulated city. Sometimes you breeze right through the line. Sometimes it could take 2 hours. Like I've seen both, but I got Clear 3 years ago, and it's been a game changer where a lot of times I'll show up like 30 minutes before we're supposed to board. And, you know, with Clear, you just cut right to the front of the line. You still have to take your shoes off and stuff, but it just kind of gives you that peace of mind. And I'm sure showing up to the airport and just waiting and thinking in your brain overworking for 3 hours, I'm sure that's not helpful at all.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be helpful if having someone like me take a flight with you would be helpful? Like one of your buddies where you like, we could kind of just do like my routine.
Yeah.
Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So I have flown with people that I'm close with, and that does help. But I've never flown with someone that the intention behind it was to show me their routine, to make me comfortable.
Yeah.
I do think that would be helpful. I think that something I always try to do, and so, and I know for a fact actually that people that I've met on airplanes watch this because that's like the first thing I tell them about now is like, check this out. And I apologize to them anyways, because I try to strike up a conversation. That helps me. There was a lady from she was from the Northeast. She was going back to JFK, I think, but I think she was originally from Boston. She's from that area. But this previous trip, the flight out of Austin into Atlanta that was delayed for 3 days or whatever it was, I finally got on the flight and I sat down and there was a lady there and we started having a conversation. And we talked about everything like family dynamics, what some of that dysfunction looks like, what working through it looks like. And I don't even remember taking off, right? Because I was engaged. And we talked that entire flight. And the flight took an additional 35, 40 minutes than it usually takes because they had to go around some weather. And I didn't even care, right? And so I know that it's important for me. Like it's a distraction for sure. And so it's really hard for me when I get on a flight and I try to strike up a conversation. And like, I don't blame them. These people are like, who the fuck is this guy?
Yeah.
Like, what does he want to talk about?
I just want to sleep on this flight.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get home. Like, you know, so I don't hold any resentment there at all. But I do like it when they're willing to have a conversation. And I met another guy and actually saw him on the second trip too, which was random at the airport. Same dude. But I met him the previous trip. We sat beside each other and we got to talking about faith. We talked a little bit about like his life, what he does for work, his travels, and had some pretty vulnerable shares on the airplane. But I ended up seeing him on the second trip too, back into Roanoke, to Virginia. And I was telling my mom about it. And she's like, those flights got delayed for a reason. You were supposed to meet that lady. You were supposed to go run in Atlanta. Because my layover was like 12 hours. So I went and ran 10 miles in Atlanta, went to Piedmont Park, went to the Belt Line, like all the things and places I never went when I was in Atlanta. One, it was COVID, and two, I was hammered all the time. So I hated Atlanta. So it really reset me on a city. And then I got on that second flight into Virginia, and that guy's on the flight that I met on the first trip. So like, God does weird things, bro.
He does.
He does really weird things. But if you're willing to it was like he was letting me know, like, hey, good job. Like, you know, I'm going to connect these dots for you. I'm going to let you see it because like you're staying committed to this process. I know you're afraid. And I always, you know, I'll text my mom and my stepdad. I'll be like, boarded. Please pray for a safe and smooth flight. I always put that in. Of course, they always do. And the last few flights haven't been smooth, right? But I don't think that's God saying, or it's like someone might liken that to like, well, that's why God's not real. No, I think it's God saying like, this is where you're at in the journey, right? You have to face these things. Not every flight's going to be smooth, right? They're going to be storms they have to go around. There's going to be turbulence. There's going to be an obnoxious passenger that gives you anxiety. There's going to be a cat fucking meowing for an hour and a half that happened on the way back.
Yeah.
Like
Baby crying.
they're all going to happen, right? And so, but I feel grateful that because I really feel like God's given it to me in doses versus all in one shot. So, yeah, I hope that made sense.
No, it does. I guess I'm just curious, like if you were to really dissect where the fear comes from, my sense is that if you're afraid of a plane crash, there's some association with a fear of death, but you also don't strike me as a guy that's really afraid of death. So where do you think it comes from at like the really deepest, darkest level? I'm
going to say some really crazy shit right now. And I know that it's crazy because people look at me crazy when I say it every single time. The first part's not crazy. The fear stems from a lack of control for me. And people will be like, well, you're not a pilot. I'm like, yeah, I understand. But if I'm in the cockpit, I feel better about the flight.
Yeah.
Like if I could sit up there with the pilots and see, because I know that they're like, I've watched a million videos of like YouTube vlogs of pilots, commercial pilots, and like cameras in the cockpit when they're doing their thing, and they're dialed. I mean, they're dialed, dude. Like they know everything that's going on. They can maneuver, they can change, they can shift. They're on high alert, super focused. But I feel so disconnected from that in the cabin, right? And
Yes.
and in my head, I'm like, man, I hope homeboy ain't having an off day. His wife didn't cheat on him. You know what I mean? He's up there like, I don't really care about this anymore, right? I wonder about those things. So it stems from a lack of control. And if I could sit in the cockpit every flight, I'd be fine.
Are you like that in the car if you have to sit in the passenger seat?
Yep. And I think that there's a few people I can ride with that I can sleep with. Like I'll fall asleep immediately. My mom's one of them. If my mom's driving, I will fall asleep immediately. If my stepdad's driving, no chance, dog. I ain't sleeping because he takes more risks, right? And so I've always been risk adverse in that way. Like I don't think there's ever a reason to sign up for death, right? And so putting yourself in those situations, I think I've always been anxious being a passenger of anything, especially on airplanes where I can't see in front of me, right? Like if I had to be a passenger in a car and my side of the windshield was covered and I could only see out of my window, I wouldn't like that either. So I think for me, a full release of control where I can't see anything, it's not like I'd be able to do anything, but when I can't see anything, I don't like it.
Yeah. Do you know Joey Muccio? Have you heard of him at all? He's boys with Hinman. He's a big runner. He's down in Florida, but he's actually a commercial pilot. And I think Matt Johnson knows him really well. We have some mutual friends. I wonder if connecting with someone like him would be helpful.
Yeah.
Like actually getting to talk to a commercial pilot, or maybe you could fly with him or something like that too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that'd be huge. I think it'd be huge for a lot of people in the community like that have a fear of flying.
Yeah.
You just want to understand what's happening. Because there's so many, for someone who's an overthinker, there's so many like sounds, beeps, bongs, like, you know, seatbelt sign on, off. Are they sitting the flight attendants down because they're really worried about turbulence, or they just don't want to do service right now because there's not a lot of time and they'll have to rush. Like I'm on to their game. You know what I mean? So like, but I don't want to have to worry about those things anymore. It doesn't matter because you look over and Joe Schmo, whoever it is over there, like legs sprawled, like he's like just riding it. Not a thought in the world. And I'm like, man, it would be great to be that or to feel that. So I'd be willing to do whatever to get to that point. Because I want to travel. It's important to me. And I think a lot of people want to travel. And I know that people get on flights every single day that don't want to.
Yeah.
But it's like, how do you bring those people together? And that's why I was thinking about this. And it's like, it sounds silly, but like, why you're in an airport, right? There's a gathering, especially a big airport. There's gathering areas available for all types of people. For a long time, smokers, like they had a place you could go smoke and meet other smokers. If you want to be around drinkers, you go to a bar. If you want to be around people doing business, you go to a lounge. Why not have an area that's designated for people that have fear of flying? Right? And it sounds crazy, but like to take that stress or anxiety off someone, I think would be like one of the most impactful things you could do. Or teach them, give them the tools to take it away. I've talked to therapists about it. Like
it's a good idea. And my initial thought process was, okay, but if you put all these anxious people in a lounge together, would that just breed more anxiety? But to what you were saying before, I would imagine a lot of people are similar to you, where it's like you just want someone to talk to kind of take your mind off of it. So if you could just be in that room and other people want to have those conversations, I'd imagine it would be pretty helpful. Yeah.
Well, and this I agree with your stance on that. And I've had that same thought. I have no issue telling people I'm afraid of flying. The people that I sit beside, straight up, be like, I don't like flying. Can't stand it. I hate it. I'm terrified. But for every one of me, there's got to be like 3 or 4 people that won't say a fucking word. They're just sitting there white knuckling it the whole time. So I think giving them the ability to be like, hey, this shit ain't for me. I hate it. I don't like it. And to talk to someone else who also feels that way, I think is helpful. Because again, going through hard things in life, like it's a necessity in order to grow. But something about knowing that you're not going through it alone helps you get there, more efficiently.
Definitely.
So I think that's why I think creating like it sounds so silly, but like a support group for people that have fear of flying or anxious flyers might be something.
Definitely. It's funny. It reminds me of when I was in kindergarten, I had this irrational fear of missing the school bus to go home. And I don't know what I'm trying to remember I don't know if it was like I thought I was going to be trapped at school all night or what it was, but I just had this super irrational fear about it. So what my teacher did is she basically created this big card that went around my neck that had my school bus number on it. So teachers would see that and they would just like usher me to my school bus, which helped a lot. So I'm not saying we need to do that for flying, but even something that just signifies that fear so you could get a little bit of extra support and people could usher you to the flight and make sure you're feeling good and feeling comfortable. Like, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's, you start to wonder, again, people don't talk about it because they're the fear of being judged. But who gives a shit? Really at the end of the day. And the reason I feel that way is if someone judges me for being afraid to get on an airplane, that might be my biggest fear, right? Ever. I'm not afraid of a lot of other things. I'm afraid of God. Like, I fear God, but like, I'm not afraid to go run in the middle of the night and hang out.
Austin.
Yeah. And hang out with homeless people. Like, I love them. Are you kidding me? We're friends. The one summer I did it so much, they would ask me, like, as I was running, like, how many miles you got tonight? But I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid of pushing my body to the absolute limits. But I think this is something that's different, right? This is something that's it's in my life for a reason, and it's there because I need to overcome it. And the fruit that it will bear by overcoming this, massive, right? Yeah. Don't know what it is or what it looks like, but it'll be massive. So that's why I have to stay in it.
And the important thing is that you're confronting it head on.
Yeah.
Like, I think we do struggle to acknowledge our own progress as well. And I think even just you having the streak of 8 flights is amazing. And, getting TSA pre, learning that, hey, if I have conversations with people, I feel better. I don't need to be as neurotic. It's like, these are all just steps in the right direction. And my guess is over the next couple of years, this thing that was just once this colossal fear and you would overthink every aspect of it, it's just another normal day. And then you get all the fruits of what travel brings you, being able to go to, California, pop over, see your mom, go to another country with your wife, like focusing on the benefits of that versus all this internal stuff that you're battling with now. But the thing is that you're making progress. And to your point earlier, I think that this is a bigger fear than people realize. Like, I think some people know they have a fear of it. And I think some people push it down and don't realize it's as big of a deal as it is. And so what I mean by that is that when you do go to these bars at like 6 o'clock in the morning in a flight, there's always like 10 plus people at the bar. And I think some people just love the fact that no rules apply at an airport, so they can drink if they want to drink at 6 a.m. But I think a lot of people are numbing themselves, whether they realize it or not, or popping a Xanax or taking a Benadryl or something like that. That's so commonplace and no one talks about it. But we never address the root cause of like, why are you afraid of flying in the first place?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And it's funny, though, that you bring up the bar thing. There were lots of conversations that I had in bars in different airports across the United States around fear of flying while drinking. So it's almost interesting. Like, drinking can bring out vulnerability in that way.
Definitely.
It's just probably not the best vehicle.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that finding a way to give people a voice where they're not afraid to talk about it is big. And I think that like most major airlines, if you go to the ticket counter on a Delta flight and you tell them, "Hey, I have a fear of flying," they will connect you with the flight attendants, and the flight attendants will do whatever they can to help make you comfortable. Most major airlines do that, I'm sure. I think what triggers a lot of people today is the same thing that triggers them in other areas of life that creates fear, is the media. Media's got a hard on right now for commercial airlines. And I think Boeing specifically, right? I think that Boeing's been getting hammered. I think they just went their second month without any orders of the 737 MAX, which is big. People are like, well, Airbus is the best, right? And of course, people are like, Boeing is the best. The reality of it is there's no safer way to get from A to B. And there's no more efficient way to get to A and B. And so I think that understanding that and understanding that the media is pushing this narrative because it's popular right now versus like the airlines actually being unsafe is important to recognize, because I think that, again, the media creates this fear storm, and they're doing the same thing around, commercial airlines now. So, yeah.
I wonder if you flew private, how that fear would come up.
Yeah, it's interesting. Charter flights, I felt better. And this is going to sound super sick and twisted. It was because if the plane crashed, I knew that I was going to die with my teammates. I was fine with that. Sorry, guys. But commercial flights are a little bit different. And it's not because those people's lives don't matter. I don't care to die with them, whatever. It's just I don't know them. And I think that's the other part of the fear for me. If I'm being truly transparent right now, a big part of the fear for me is I judge people at the gate hard. I'm like, okay, does this person look like someone who could try some sketchy shit? Right? Does this person look like someone who would try to stop some sketchy shit? Is this lady completely innocent and like she's not going to be, she's not going to be of any use if something is needed at 30,000 feet? I think like I go into that level of detail or depth. And for a long time, and I can speak about it now because this is something I've actively I think worked through, and it was hard for me, but I'm going to keep it 100. After 9/11, I profiled the shit out of people. If you looked a certain way, I was automatically more on guard. I was automatically more afraid to fly, like eyes on you the whole time. So I was profiling them or being prejudiced towards them because of a certain look. And I know that that's not correct, and I know that that's not right, and I know that not everyone that looks a certain way behaves a certain way. I have that awareness. But it took me some time to work through that. And honestly now, I think that, you have to get over that because we are such a cultured place. Austin is extremely diverse in that way. So if you're flying out of Austin and going to Atlanta being the busiest airport in the world, there's a good chance you're going to be flying with people that don't look like you. Right. And so I think that understanding that not everyone is there to take down an airplane is important too. So that being said, and the charter statement, I do think getting on a private jet would be less stressful for me. The other thing is they fly higher, the air's thinner, it's less bumpy. They're not flying faster, technically. They're not that much faster than a commercial airliner, but the air's thinner so they can move smoother. It's more efficient. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. Yeah, there's just this with flying. There just is this outsourcing of control, and it's interesting how we fixate on airplanes so much. I guess just because it's the gravitas of risk when you're flying, but we outsource our risk every day, right? It's like you're at a restaurant, you're trusting this person that they're not going to poison your food, or there's so many other examples of that. And so obviously that applies to the airplane because you're trusting your life is in the pilot's hand and the crew's hand too. But it doesn't make it any easier, but it's like we are constantly outsourcing our risk, but it's so easy to hyperfixate on whatever those fears are.
Yeah. Yeah. And with flying too, another fear that I have is obviously you have to worry about the plane going down for whatever reason. And then you have to worry about the plane getting hijacked. The other level to that is the air traffic control side, especially coming in and out of somewhere like Atlanta, right? Where they, I think at one point Delta was turning 90 flights an hour. So, I mean, you could do that math. It's more than a flight a minute. It's like a flight every 45 seconds or whatever it is. So the traffic pattern's busy. It takes one person, one time, to tell a plane to go the wrong way. And then you don't even know it's coming though, right? You can't see it. So just half your plane's gone and then you're falling through the sky. Like I have those fears, like of colliding midair. Or they'll have someone land and, there's someone crossing the runway to get to the gate and then the plane's got to touch and go because they don't want to collide. Or they'll have one landing and taking off at the same time, kind of chasing each other. Like there's a lot happening that I think that for me, I spin out on all of them at one time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah. It's interesting the way the brain works because, and I know you've acknowledged that you do this too. My brain is always just when I hear Atlanta 90 flights a minute, I just imagine that there's so much scientific choreography going on behind the scenes to ensure that never happens. But of course, there's always a degree of risk too.
Right.
So it's easy how you can fixate on one way or another. And I just always try to fixate on the positive because it's like, at the end of the day, I don't have control over it.
Well, here's the flip side to that coin. The reason I still fly into Atlanta knowing that fact is because one must assume, like logical brain, if Atlanta's the busiest airport in the world and it's Delta's largest hub, that Delta's best employees are there.
Yeah.
Right? The smartest people that are on, like they're dialed full time, 24/7. So like that's the other reason I still fly in for the same reason that it scares me to fly out.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm like, okay, the best people work there. Whereas if you fly into like a podunk town where there's like 3 flights a day, you got to worry about running into Jim Bob who just like fertilized his plants.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like you don't know. It's probably more risky. But yeah, I think that the big airports really, it's easier for me to fly in and out of because the other thing that happens, and I'm sure you've experienced this a multitude of times, but you'll be like number 8 in line for takeoff or number 10 in line for takeoff. That always puts me at ease because I'm like, oh, there's 10 other planes getting ready to like take off right now and also be in the air. And then you look at how many flights there are per day and how many travelers there are per day and that there was no deaths yesterday, right? So at some point, like the logic side does help. But I think until I get over whatever is the root of my fear, it's always going to be there.
Yeah. I know you've spent some pretty extensive hours with different therapists throughout the years. Is there anything a therapist has ever taught you that's been helpful to you or not really?
Baseline stuff, right? Control your breathing. I knew that. Like Google told me that. Oh. So control your breathing. I think that therapists do the best with what they're given. Mm-hmm. There's probably therapists or psychologists that are specifically, their specific like avenue or area of expertise is in fear of flying. I should probably talk to one of those. But the therapist I've worked with, that probably wasn't their specific area of expertise. So it would be like, control your breathing. Don't drink before the flight. because that can increase anxiety. I never had that experience. It was always the opposite. I've also never taken a Xanax in my entire life, which is a little bit shocking to me. Like, I'm sure I would have if somebody would offered it to me.
Yeah, it just never popped up.
Just never came up. Yeah. So I think that, but they've given advice like that, or I've had therapists say like, hey, you should talk to a doctor and get like a low dose benzo for your flight to help ease the anxiety. And like, I'm not going to go that route because that's not me facing it. I'd rather walk out of the airport than take a benzo and get on a plane.
Yeah. And I'm sure you feel this too. I know with my personality, you give me some benzo for an airplane, I'm going to be using it way more than just for when I need to fly.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to manifest into something horrendous.
Oh, yeah. I'm feeling anxious right now. And within a month, I'll be snorting them. It's like, why would I swallow this?
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's I don't know. There's a lot packed into it, and I'm sorry if we were all over the place for the viewer, the listener, but I think it's important to continue to share like raw, real vulnerabilities, because people look at people and think that they're a certain thing and that they don't have any of these weaknesses or fears or flaws. And the reality of it is, like, we all do. And this is a big one of mine. So I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate you coming in and helping me facilitate it.
Dude, 100%. I always just have tremendous respect for your continued vulnerability, and it's empowering to me to just talk about these things that are actually on your chest. It doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you strong, and it makes you relatable to people too, because at the end of the day, what I've always come back to is where God really did make us to be imperfect, and we have all different types of fucked up thoughts, whether people want to admit it or not. We all do, but it's doing the things that you're doing of like choosing not to be comfortably numb, choose to fly on your own, continue to get on the plane and iterate over time. And you've already made so much progress than a couple years ago. So I'm just imagining that now that you're confronting it head on, and maybe we could pull in some resources and connect you to the right people. And I'm really excited to see where you are in the next couple years. But I think this is a good impetus for us to just take a flight together. I think that'd be fun.
Yeah, I do. And I look forward to the day that I get to the airport and I get on the plane and I'm just smiling, right? Because I can do that anywhere else. But I look forward to that day, and it's coming. It's just going to take some more work. But yeah, I think that, again, to your point, don't ever be envious of someone's gifts that they've been given, because you don't know what flaws they've been given either.
100%.
And most people aren't going to talk about them, but understand that when you look at somebody, careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
Right. Be very careful what you wish for, because they might have all the gifts that you think you want, or the opposite of your flaws, but they might have the flaws of your strengths. Right.
Totally.
So to me, it's something that can be overcome. So what a gift to have. That's a perfect gift.
Perfect gift.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, hope that was good for everybody. We're going to wrap. Appreciate you, Brett.
Appreciate you, my man.
And we'll be checking in soon. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Ain't Dead Yet podcast.